Hi, welcome to the second season of Baktari MD. And we're going to do something very special the second season. What we're going to do is we're going to do a crash course for CEOs. So this is something I get a lot of questions about. I've been on tons of podcasts the last year or two, and everybody wants to know the mistakes you should or shouldn't make. Why make the mistakes yourself? If you're starting an organization, if you're already there and you want to grow it, skip the 10, 15, 20 years of making those mistakes. If there was a way you could learn what to do to make your organization more effective, how to be a more effective CEO, how to be a more effective leader, don't make some of the mistakes. Build the culture that you want. When is the right time to get into technology? When is the right time to do everything? If there's a way to learn from someone, like an apprentice, learn from other people's mistakes. I think all of us who've been doing this for 10, 20 years wish we could go in a time machine and go back and tell that person from 20 years ago, oh my gosh, skip all of this. So Crash CEO School is what we're calling this for season 2. So each episode this season, we're going to talk about something very unique about managing your company, being a good CEO, being a good leader. We'll have some really broad topics that we'll go over, like the top 10 mistakes you can make, the top 10 things you should do. Also, we'll have guests on who have been in the trenches and can help us with the learning curve of how to be an effective CEO and how to make your company blow up. Okay, so welcome to Crash CEO School. And we're going to start with this first episode where we're going to go over the 10 secrets of blowing up your company as a CEO, the 10 secrets that you should really know ahead of time. So even if you're somewhat in your journey, you're halfway through your journey, or even if you're in the tail end of your journey, you could still learn. Okay, please leave lots of comments, please subscribe, and let's start our first episode now. Hi, welcome to another episode of Baktari MD. This is our first episode of the second season, and we have a lot of exciting things in store for you. Last year, I got a lot of feedback about some of the things that we talked about, and many people asked me to talk more about how we were able to set up our organizations in the manner we were. In essence, how to succeed in setting up a healthcare organization or any other kind of organization. What are the things that are the most important things? So this season, what I really want to do is focus on passing on some of that information about how to set up a winning organization, whether it's in healthcare, but it can actually apply to other types of organizations as well. So what I'd like to do this season is, go over that, some on broad terms, and then drill down to some very specifics, including having some guests that might be able to give us even more insight. So today's episodes is really about the 10 secret ways that I have learned over time on how to make a startup, a new business, blow up into something amazing. Now, part of that is when I thought about how to set this up, is I actually took the approach of what would I have wanted to know, when I was starting, if I could go back in a time machine and pass on some of that information. What are the things that really are essential to know? So buckle up, and we're going to go through the 10 most important things that I feel are necessary to make any startup, any organization that you're trying to put together really blow up into something special. And honestly, when you really look at this list, I can't imagine it being successful if most or all of these things were not taken into consideration. You will have the advantage of having it up front, so you know what to do as you come out of the gate. So if you're ready, let's get started. So first of all, let me start off saying the first thing that you really need to make an organization or a new startup work is you have to make the conscious decision to be on all the time. And I'm going to talk about that. What does it mean to be on all the time? Well, first of all, I think a lot of people start an organization as a side hustle, hoping, while they're doing whatever else they're doing, this might blow up. But rarely does an organization really take off unless it is really your total focus. Now, what that really means is that failure is not an option. You really have to be at a point where when you jump into this, it can't be a side gig that you hope might, if everything goes well, turn out your way. That sort of commitment means that you have to be on all the time. Now, you may have another job when you're first starting this out. You may be focused on a few other things, but rarely do you see an organization, a new startup, take off without the principal founder being all in, meaning they don't really have a whole lot that they're focused on except for that. Of course, we all have our family and God and other priorities in life. And so that doesn't mean it's to the exclusion of that, but it does mean it has to be a right time in your life where you can, put a significant portion of your time in that endeavor. And what that really means is to be on all the time. That means, whether it's nights, weekends, it doesn't mean you're working, but it does mean that you're always on and working on your business at least on some subconscious, conscious level at all times. So even when you're out for dinner or what have you, and you hear someone bring up an idea that might impact what you're thinking about, it doesn't mean you just tune on and just tune it off and just move on to the next subject. You really are going to be heavily invested even nights and weekends, even when you're not actually working on the business. So really, if you're at a point where you can't give it that kind of commitment or dedication, honestly, this video may not be for you, because there are times in people's lives where they simply have a lot going on, and launching a organization that's going to go to the moon is not going to be easy, and it's going to require a big portion of their self-sacrifice, their will, their drive. And so if this video has caught you in the right time in your life, then okay, keep watching. There have been times in my life where I don't think I really wanted to give that kind of sacrifice to a project or to an endeavor. For whatever reason, I had a lot of other stuff going on, personal or other interests. And so what we have found, what I have seen, is if you're at a time in your life where you have, 5, 6, 7 other things going on, and this can't, next to God and family, be the most important thing in your life, it's probably going to dramatically reduce the chances of this working. So first real thing you need to know is you need to be on all the time, and is this the right time in your life to do this? So think about that, because everything else we're going to talk about doesn't really matter if it's not the right time in your life to go all in. The second secret I want to really talk about is having this mentality, and it kind of ties into the first one, where failure is not an option. When people have a steady source of income that they're very happy with, and otherwise things are going well, and they're okay, they enjoy what they're doing, they're getting a good income, rarely do you see them move on to something else that becomes an amazing success, either for financial reasons or for satisfaction, or some people have a lot of creative juices. You have to decide that if you do this, failure is not an option. Because as you will see, the first time there's a hiccup in the road, and there will be many hiccups in the road, it's easy to give up. And if you already have 5 fallback things, your spouse makes a nice income, you're already comfortable, so it's not financial, you're relatively happy with whatever else you're doing. On some level, it has to be a burning desire to want to make a change. Maybe you want to make a change to give a service to the community. Maybe you want to do something that contributes something to society. Maybe you want to do something generationally for your family. Whatever it is, you need to get to the point where failure is not an option. And one of the stories I like to give about failure not being an option is you see this all the time. You'll see an interview on TV with someone who has become a multi-zillionaire, and often the story you hear is they had a steady job at IBM or somewhere else, and they're 45 years old. One day the company merges or downsizes and they're let go, and the husband or wife comes home and says, honey, I was let go today, and what do we do now? Who's going to hire someone like me, middle-aged, to be in management, what have you, or what have you. And then you say, well, honey, what about that thing we've been thinking about in the garage that we always talked about? Why don't we try that? So what you see is that people only take those kind of risks and try those things they only dreamt about when they're actually, let go of a job and they're sitting in their living room with no other options. The way I look at it is it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to wait until that happens to you, or it may never happen to you, but you still have to have the mindset as though that happened to you. You have to have the mindset that whatever you're currently doing is the clock is ticking on. So let's say you have a job, or even if you have another endeavor, you just have to say, okay, I'm going to assume this endeavor is going to end in a year, this job's going to end in a year, and I need to be ready. You almost have to psych yourself out and say, whatever I'm doing is going to go away, because then you'll have this failure is not an option, because you're going to have to put bread on the table, or you're going to have to do something with your time. So the second most important thing is to just get it into your mind that failure is not an option. There's nothing to fall back on. Even if there is, you have to psych yourself out and say, I've got nothing to fall back on. This has got to work. Now we're going to talk about, how to find that thing, but assuming you've made it there, you've got to have this mindset that failure is in no way an option. Of course, the next big thing is picking the right business. And I think this is where a lot of people make a mistake. How do you pick the right business? A lot of times it's the first thing that comes to their mind. They're browsing a website, new business opportunity. They go to a cocktail party, somebody tells them, there's this opportunity. Really what you have to do is make sure the business you pick has some essential qualities. Number one, you have to like the business on some level. It has to speak to you. The best businesses are ones where people have passion, and either for themselves, for their family, or for their community, they feel they can make a difference. And so think about that. And, I call it the kissing a lot of frogs thing. You have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find the right business. And so I would say, as a rule of thumb, the first 20, 50, 100 businesses you consider, you'll have to probably, chuck out the window for one reason or another. And, in evaluating businesses, there are several things you need to look at. First of all, if you're already coming from a place where you have a job and you really are looking for financial or time freedom, or, managerial freedom where you're calling all the shots, the first thing you have to really ask yourself is, will this job really give me independence? Okay, because, will this business really give me independence? Because you don't want it to turn into another job, is what I meant to say. Because at the end of the day, you already may have a job. You don't want to start a business to give yourself another job. Even though it's a business, it can turn easily into another job. So you have to really look at it and say, is this something I'm compassionate about? Can I actually run this business without it turning into a job for me? And also, can I make a difference? Also, you have to look at most businesses and ask yourself, are these businesses the kind of businesses that really have lots of competition? There's no new innovation. I'm not bringing anything to the table. The surefire way to succeed in starting a business is to solve a problem no one else is solving. Try to figure out, as you consider these hundreds of businesses to start, What is there a business that I can solve a problem that no one else is solving? There's a very good business book called Blue Ocean Strategies where they talk about, not trying to get into a business in essence where you have tons of competitors and you're just going to be, joining them and stealing their clients. They'll be stealing yours. Ideally, you want to get into a business in an ideal sense where your competition is irrelevant. And so when you evaluate your businesses, if someone says, oh, gee golly, how would you like to open up a yogurt shop? And I say, gee, there's like 20 yogurt shops in my neighborhood. That's not really a blue ocean strategy, is it? Because you're not really doing something that's going to put yourself out without any real competition. So the goal is, as you innovate and as you think of businesses that allow you to make your competition irrelevant, even if it's not true from the beginning. In other words, you may decide to open up a yogurt shop, but is there something over time at least you can bring to the yogurt business that will really make your competition irrelevant? So we've seen this in many, many fields where, yes, they're getting into a field that's very crowded, but they're going to do it in a way eventually that's going to make their competition irrelevant. You could take Uber, for example. I'm sure the first time the concept came out, there are plenty of taxi companies, car services. So how's having one more going to matter? Well, how it mattered is they innovated, came up with technology so that platform, the app that they use, certainly puts them in a different category than a taxi cab service or something like this. So making yourself eventually, not even out, maybe out of the gate, you may be just another yogurt shop. You may be another taxi company. But the plan is for you to evolve into, again, the blue ocean strategy of having your competition be irrelevant. Because really, if you go into business, be another pool cleaning service or another yogurt shop, basically what you're doing is you're getting into a business that you're simply going to compete with other companies for the same clientele, and you're in that red ocean then because you're just fighting over the same clients. What you want to do is have your clients essentially have nowhere else to go because you've created the market. Now, again, just to stress that, it's hard to do that out of the gate. But if you have an idea for how you can take an old business, get into it, and then slowly just use blue ocean strategies where you innovate and you come up with approaches where no one else is doing that. So don't just say we're slightly better than the competition, or we answer the phones a little faster, we get there a little bit sooner, or our billing is a little more transparent. That's a red ocean strategy. You're still fighting for the same people, and you're marginally better than the competitor. You want your competitors to become irrelevant. And that's really the goal. So when I say you have to look at 100 businesses, that's why you have to look at 100 businesses. Because yes, they may sound good, but they may not have some of those features, and some more features we're going to talk about in a little bit too. So think about that, because I have found that people who find businesses that really they're just another one of 100 in the same industry, in many ways are creating another job for themselves. So they may feel like they've left a job, but now they've just created another job for them. Especially, like in franchising a lot. When you buy a franchise, often, unless you buy 10, 20, 30 of them, you're just creating a job for yourself. And yes, you have some autonomy, but at the end of the day, you're really not in a situation where you're not competing with people. You're competing and just trying to be slightly better than the next guy, but not to the point where your competition, as I say, is irrelevant. Which, this kind of gets along to the same lines of creating a disruptive business or finding a business that solves a problem that no one else has solved. And so think about that. And even if it doesn't do that at the beginning, see if there's a path for you to, over time, even months or years, to take it in that direction. Okay, so let's get to number 4. Okay, so the next real secret is you have to research the business you finally have honed in on. And how do you do that? So a couple of things. First of all, one of the best ways to research a business is really go to all the competition if they exist, or similar things that you want to disrupt. Go there, be a client, visit their offices, make an appointment, go through their entire processes. If you're getting into the mortgage business, go literally fill out a couple of applications, go through the process. If you're looking at buying a pool, you want to start a pool company, go and literally go through the process. Go see your competition, understand the competition. Of course, all their websites, research their reviews. You can learn a lot from just studying those businesses. Imagine you're buying their business. Research those businesses. Often when you do the research on these businesses, the pitfalls that maybe you may notice later if you had gone into it will become clear to you at the beginning. Next, and this is a really tough one, but I tell you, if you can pull this off, it's amazing. I've given people a lot of advice that when they're really thinking about getting into business is, if there is a way, if it's possible, go get a job in the business. I remember many years ago, an acquaintance of mine came up to me and said, I'm thinking about getting in the limo business. He goes, oh, it's very lucrative. You can just lease these limos for $1,000 a month, and you can make $2,000 a month on each one, and it all sounded good on paper. So one of the things we talked about, I said, you know what? Why don't you go get a job at a limo company for 2-3 months? If it's that great, you'll figure it out. I mean, and also you'll learn on their dime. You won't have to make the mistakes when you buy the business or when you start the business. And he actually came to me, he actually did it, and he came to me about a month or two later. He goes, oh, the limo business is the worst. I said, what happened? He goes, well, first of all, there's all these things where, depending on where you take them, you get kickbacks, and the licenses are hard to get, and the city regulates how many licenses there are. You got to know people, and a whole litany of problems with the limo business, which I'm sure, depending on where you are, is a fine business. But the point was, what sounds great on paper, when you actually get in the weeds, why learn all this stuff then? If you have the bandwidth, if you're in the right situation, go get a job in that industry. And for not only for you to understand the pitfalls, but even if you decide to move ahead with it, why not learn so you don't have to have that kind of learning curve? I just saw somebody on YouTube who was interested in opening up a drop-off package, mailbox company where, like Mailbox, etc., one of those companies. And she was interested in opening one for herself. So she actually went to an established person, said, listen, I'll give you, $5,000-$10,000 if you let me shadow you for 2 weeks and teach me everything about the business so I don't make those mistakes. And that was probably the best $5,000-$10,000 she ever spent, because during that time she learned where to put the counter, how to make the boxes, and how to streamline what businesses to get into, what parts of the business were not profitable. So this idea of getting a job in the business, or convincing someone in the business to let you shadow them for a couple of weeks, a month or 2 months, because you do not want to find out all the things that are wrong with that business once you get into it. And also, once you get into it, you also may realize, oh wow, this is how it's done traditionally, but here's a way I could maybe improve on that and innovate and do it differently. So you can't really innovate if you don't know where the friction is, sort of behind the scenes, sort of like in the kitchen of the restaurant. So you want to really get into the kitchen of the restaurant before you get into the restaurant business, if I can use that metaphor. Does that make sense? So you want to really see, how the cogs in the wheel work, and where the friction is, and where the rub is. So 1, you can make a better decision about going into the business. 2, if you decide to go into business, you already know the things to avoid ideally. and this will allow you to make a better decision either way. The next thing that's under the same category, which is researching the business, is to go to conferences. I can't tell you how valuable they're. So if you're going to an industry that there's conferences, those are all really great ideas. Networking, meeting people. You could find the sort of Michael Jordan of that person in that industry, hire them as your consultant. So just to repeat, to research the business, which is our fourth thing, find a job in the field, shop and study all your competitors, and go to as many conferences as you can. Those conferences will really, really give you a feel for the ups and downs of that whole industry. And there are ways to go to these conferences. I know they can get expensive. You can just get something that just gets you into the exhibit hall, and not the whole conference, depending on your level. And then some conferences have really amazing tutorials or small group sessions about how to get started in the business and pitfalls and what have you, plus the networking. One thing about conferences, I always really recommend go at least one day early, because a lot of the networking occurs actually often the night before the conference, depending on when the conference starts. A lot of people get there early. They haven't gotten into the conference yet. They're just out for dinner or having drinks at the hotel, at the restaurants around there. So really try to get there early. A lot of people make the mistake of kind of coming in just in time, but I recommend if you can get there a little bit earlier for these conferences in terms of networking. Okay, so moving on to number 5. Make sure the business is scalable without you. So this kind of feeds on, don't create yourself a job. Yes, initially the business is going to need you. It's going to need you for the first year, 2 years, 3 years. But really, if the business is dependent on you doing the work, you can't really grow the business or work on the business. So if you're the one cleaning the pools, if you're the one that's, running the front counter, if you're going to be the main chef at the restaurant, it's not ideal because it's not scalable. There's only so many restaurants you can open, and right from the beginning, you need to find something that's scalable. Theoretically, everything's scalable, but certain businesses are much more scalable than others without you. So yes, you could run around all day long, but the goal of it is for you, it's not below you to work in your business, but I'm going to make the argument that it's better for you to work on your business than work in your business. Maybe the first year, yes, you work in the business, because when you hire other people and train other people, you need to know the business as though you're an employee and you've worked there. So initially, yes, most businesses, you are going to have to do everything, but try to look at the business model and say, if this grew, would I need to be there? And at the end of the day, the most scalable businesses are the ones that can scale without you, because there's only one you, and that cannot be the rate limiting. Plus, as the business grows, your ability to focus on higher level issues will have a much bigger impact on the business than your ability to literally get in the weeds and solve problems. And then we'll have other talks about how to hire people and how to create an organization. All of that will hopefully be in future episodes. But for now, I just want to let you know, if you look at a business and the business is going to involve you being there in perpetuity, you may want to look somewhere else, because especially if you already have a job and you're trying to get to the point where you can be more creative, you can let your entrepreneurial side run wild and think outside the box and solve problems and disrupt things and create innovations. You're not going to be able to do that very well if you're in the grind, behind the counter or wherever. You're going to want to be more focused on that. So to leave you with that, find a business that's scalable eventually without you. Again, the caveat, I would say the first year or two, that probably doesn't apply, but at some point can grow without you. Let's talk about number 6, and that is no debt. This is a tough one because having debt when you're starting a business is very common. So it's easy enough for me to say, don't take on debt. But there's a reason I say that. In evaluating a business, if there is a way to start a business without debt, that's ideal, not only because of the bad nature of just having debt, but also debt sometimes forces you to make decisions that aren't in the best interest of the company you're doing because of, you have to make this payment. So if you start a restaurant and lease all your equipment, which many people do, for example, those lease payments may dictate your cash flow, may dictate how long you can actually stay in business if things go south for a few months, and it might impact what you put on the menu because you need higher margins, what have you. Having no debt lets you allow the business to grow more organically and less impacted by the debt. Now, there'll be other financial, considerations. You have to make payroll, pay taxes, pay for your vendors, what have you. But that added component of paying debt while you're starting a business can really cloud your judgment. So that's easy enough for me to say have no debt, and that becomes a struggle. Often that means going through your savings or starting at a smaller scale than you thought. Maybe not having a huge office, maybe using executive suites, maybe doing it out of your home. But you have to really think it through. There is a big price to be paid, no pun intended, when you take debt on. Debt is not your friend. Actually, debt is actually much better many years later when your business has grown, plateaued. Then I think using debt to really get to the next level often makes sense because you've already established everything. And so taking on debt at the beginning is not a wise idea. Even if you have to hold down a second job, to some extent, it's probably better than taking on debt, especially if it doesn't impact your ability to focus on your primary business. And that really goes to being on all the time. Sometimes being on all the time means doing a little side hustle so you can support your main business that you're trying to promote. Okay, next one's a really touchy subject, which is don't take any partners. Now that's a tough one because partners help, especially with equity and the work and what have you. And sometimes it's a necessary thing. You got to take a partner, or maybe your partner brings some skill sets you don't have. I get all that. I'm just going to tell you the downside of bringing a partner is that a lot of small businesses, when they're first starting out, have to make quick decisions this way, that way. Getting consensus on everything is very difficult. Sometimes, especially in the first year, yes, there are partners that are just simpatico and they both go in the right direction. But I've also seen businesses fall apart that probably were good businesses and would have done really well, except the partners just couldn't see eye to eye. Maybe there were different stages in their lives, maybe their finances were different, and how soon they cash flowed was more important to one than the other. And so the freedom of being able to make decisions without someone else is something that can often help. Of course, it can, if you make the wrong decisions, it can hurt you too. So that freedom is a two-edged sword. You have to make the right decisions. But I have found that when you have a partner, especially if they have equal voting like you do, or multiple partners, yes, are there partnerships that have taken off and flourished? Yes. And it does help with having more talent, having more energy, more money. So there's a lot of upside. Just be careful that if you take on a partner, you're not going to be as nimble. You can't switch on a dime necessarily. So those are some of the downsides of taking on a partner. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is more practical stuff. Okay, so you've gone through all that, you've picked everything. Now you have to pick a domain, a website name. Why do I actually make this a whole category? Well, I think the website domain is really, in this age, is so crucial. I think there is multiple things to consider in selecting a domain name. One, it's ideal if your domain name somehow conveys what you do, but not always, but that's often important. It's important just for people to understand your website immediately. It's important for Google to understand, when to show you. And I think it helps, put you in a certain category as the internet world is concerned. Now, when having that in mind, you have to also understand that a lot of times when businesses start, they think they're going to do one thing. We're going to do, bike sales, but then they wind up doing bike repairs and e-bikes, and so you have to also be careful that you don't pigeonhole yourself. So there lies the dilemma. So to pick a name that describes what you're doing, but also may describe what you might do in the future. And really, so many businesses sort of evolve, from one thing to another. So if I went onto a website that said e-bike world, I would immediately know they're mainly into e-bikes. Let's say they used to be a bicycle company in the past. Now they're more into e-bikes. So, switching that domain is not going to be easy from a branding and marketing point of view. So this becomes a dilemma. So again, just pick a domain that describes what you do. If it can also describe what you might do in the future, or then maybe leave it generic enough to include all of those things, and make sure that it's something that is not too generic, like bicycle shop, but is not too narrow that nobody would know you're a bicycle shop. So you have to find that sweet spot. Obviously, you have to see if it's available. And the shorter, of course, it is, the better. So these are all the factors you have to think about in picking a domain name. But picking a domain name is a very serious business. It's going to impact, if your business takes off in 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years later, you are going to be living with that. Are there ways you can, switch that around years later and literally rebrand yourself? Of course. It's not fun. It's a lot of work. Customers get confused. Vendors get confused. It's doable, and you lose a lot of SEO juice potentially. So think about that really hard. Pick a name. Spend time on it. Don't just imagine what you want to do now. Imagine if your business takes off, what other products, what other services are you going to offer, and will that name adequately describe what you want to do then? Okay, so along the same lines, the next topic that I want to talk to you about is writing your website, creating your website. This is a tough one because unless you're in a world or in a business that the internet does not impact, which probably doesn't exist anymore, how you write your website matters. A lot of people, when they're first starting out, don't want to spend a lot on a website, and I don't think you have to, but you have to be really careful of these websites where, for $50 or $100, you can put it together. As we're going to talk about, the main thing about creating a website is to have the right content and create enough SEO juice, as it were, so that your website will appear when people search for it, especially if you're the type of business that is amenable to search. A lot of people don't necessarily search for a doctor, they refer to a doctor, but other businesses they just naturally will search for. So if your business is going to be somewhat dependent on search, how much you invest on that website really, really matters. And I think you have to be really careful. I don't want to, downplay, a standard WordPress website. But you know what? If you're going to start a business, you have to become a website person in the sense that you understand the terminology, the pros and cons. So number one, try to get a website that has some unique codes and it's just not a standard plug and play website. Those have issues. They're not, generally, they don't have as much SEO juice as a custom made website. Generally, if there's a lot of plugins like WordPress plugins, there can be security issues. Really, really invest in it. I know people want to come out of the gate with a $200 website, $100 website. And by the way, just because you spend a lot of money, give someone $5,000, $10,000, doesn't mean anything. They can give you a $100 website and charge you $5,000, $10,000. So it really, you have to invest some time in understanding website design and how the coding is done for your website. So just make sure you really do your research, because your website may or may not impact your whole business. Where you rank when somebody puts in yogurt, Boulder City, Nevada, will matter. I mean, it's going to matter. So think about that, invest in it. And along with the website, so we have to talk about what else you need to do with your website. Well, first of all, search engine optimization. That's a big word. It means a lot of things to a lot of people, but I'm just going to break it down in the most crudest sense. Search engine optimization is really broken up in more than three categories, but three main categories. One is what we call technical SEO. And the best way to look at technical SEO, and there's a lot of videos on YouTube about technical SEO, is basically how well your website is understood by Google and the other search engines. So things like header tags, H1 tags, keywords in your content, how mobile friendly it is, the speed at which your website loads, what your site map that's embedded in your website looks in terms of Google being able to read it, this thing called your Google crawl budget, how long it takes for Google to crawl your website. All those, as well as the content, make up technical SEO and allows Google to understand what your website is, so it knows when to show it and when not to show it. So if you're new to websites, just spend a little time understanding what technical SEO means. Then after technical SEO, let's move on to content SEO. So the content and the order that you put it in on the website and how easy it is for Google to understand that content is going to matter in terms of how it ranks. Also, you should understand that if you plagiarize or copy and paste other content from even your vendors or other places that you think is relatively safe, it may impact your SEO juice and how well you rank. So original content that speaks to the problem, has keywords that really are relevant to your business and to what people would be searching for. Along with that is to set up a great review process where your customers can do reviews. There's plenty of those companies out there. And so make sure you understand how the review process works. If you put a comment in the section, I can kind of give you a couple of the ones we've used in the past. More than happy to help you with that. I don't want to kind of go off on that tangent, but to make sure on your website you set up a review process. And then lastly, want to talk about content SEO. So content SEO is obviously, writing blogs, infographics, other features on your website that create content, and then taking that content and putting it on other social media, which gets to my next thing, which is social media SEO, which is taking your social media sites and putting some of the content that you're writing in blogs and other posts and putting in there, as well as joining communities on Facebook and other and on LinkedIn to interact with whatever organizations that are relevant to you. So this idea of just creating a website for $99, throwing it up, is probably not going to work in most cases. And especially if you are in the kind of business where you hope to attract enterprise clients on top of retail clients, nothing will tell someone, hey, as an enterprise customer, this is not an enterprise business. So if you're trying to attract enterprise clients, you need to act like you're an enterprise business. Even if you're starting out, you need to puff your chest up. I always say, hey, they should, by looking at your website, they should not know whether you have, they might guess you have 100 employees, 2,000 employees. Your website should not communicate, oh, we're a small pod operation just starting out. There's no reason why your website can't convey that you are a very deep, rich organization by having enough content, enough material, and spend enough money on your website. I can tell you, even for us, when we look at a vendor, if we go to a website that looks like it was, someone had spent an hour on it, and there was misspellings and the content seemed all over the place, we already know they're not a serious business in terms of an enterprise solution for what we need. So a lot of times, HR directors and decision makers and C-suites, if they're looking at a potential partner to work with, they're going to go right to that website. They're going to see, you don't have many social media posts. They're going to see how many followers you have. That's a surefire way to figure out, again, if you're an enterprise company and you're looking to work with another enterprise company, it's going to be pretty easy to figure out that this is just new business and there's just a few people behind it. It doesn't have to be that way. If you invest the time and energy in it, you can actually make your website appear that there's 1,000 employees. I remember early on when we first created our websites for our companies, after we really got deep into it, I often, I get an email saying, hey, by the way, is your company on the stock market? Who's your parent company? And, what I found interesting about that is, obviously, we're not on the stock market, but, because of the content, because of our investment in social media, that people often mistaked us for someone who might be. So that's a really good tail sign when people start asking you, who's your parent company or what other enterprise clients do you work with. Again, that's going to be a testimony to what they see on your social media as well as your website. Okay, so the next little secret I'm going to tell you is to start investing in technology. So I think this becomes very hard when you're first starting out, but the one thing I got to tell you is initially, obviously, price is going to be an issue, affordability, third-party softwares, whether it's a CRM, whether it's a point-of-sale software, whether it's a calendar software, appointment software. There are great third parties that do that, depending on what you're doing. My recommendation, though, is if you're really going to be creating a new space, a new disruptive thing, at some point you have to start investing in your own technology. And I recommend, once you get the cash flow, to start small. Take a small project, whether you go on Fiverr or Upworks, or you get introduced to the right software development team, which has its pitfalls. You have to find the right ones. Get a small project, have them do it as your budget allows, and then grow from there. And what I recommend is, as your company becomes successful, slowly take all your third-party softwares that you can and bring them in-house. Because what we have found is, if you bring that technology in-house, in many ways you're going to improve customer experience, you're going to provide better quality, you're going to create less work for your own staff, which is going to help retention, morale, what have you, and it's going to give you a return on your investment. So writing your own technology, I know it sounds crazy, but this is 2022. You can write your own technology. It's not that crazy anymore. It's not cheap. It's not crazy, especially if you take a small project. And the ones I recommend you focus on are which third-party software is not ideal for us. You'll wind up using third-party softwares and you say, gee, that scheduler, it doesn't do this because it's not really made for us. It's made for, other industries or what have you. or if there was a way this could connect to our website or integrate different softwares, all of that is going to be technology driven. Technology, when done right for the right company, improves customer experience, improves customer service, makes your product look better, makes you look better, reduces your costs, reduces your overhead, can reduce labor costs. It's just that initial investment, and also finding the right team. So these are all things on the roadmap to becoming that disruptive company. I think leveraging technology surgically at the beginning can give you a taste for it and keep growing. Even something as simple as using a third-party point-of-sale software, even when you're first starting out, gives you great feedback on how your sales are doing in real time, which things are selling the most. I find a lot of small businesses just speculate. Oh, I think we're selling a lot of this, or we're getting a lot of calls for that. But having a cloud-based POS system is a great first strategy. I recommend any business that can pull it off, get a cloud-based point-of-sale software. I think people think POS systems are just for hardware stores and restaurants. It's not true. You could be anything that accepts cash or payments can use a POS system, cloud-based POS system, as well as other third-party, and then eventually see how much of the stuff you can bring house. The other things, CRMs are very important. You really want to know who your best clients are, how often they're buying, if they keep coming back, when they've stopped buying. That's data that you don't want to just figure out on your own. Again, when you're first starting, yes, but as you grow, you're going to need all of them. Next topic is really hiring the right people. I'm going to do a whole talk on this, but I think bringing on the right people is probably one of the most complicated and challenging thing of starting any new business. I think there is a challenge in identifying people who want to grow and want to be in an environment where there is no limit financially, upside, or professionally. As long as the company is growing, they're going to be growing. And so in many ways, they become co-owners of it, sort of metaphorically, because if you build a culture where people are respected and welcomed and their ideas are important, and you let them know that as your company grows, they're going to grow, both financially and professionally, you're going to attract the right group. Now, there are certain people who don't want that, who just want a paycheck, want to clock in, clock out, and that's fine. But that's probably not going to work if you're a startup. You're going to need people who are heavily invested. You're going to need people who really want to see your vision become their vision, get enrolled into your vision, and can see themselves retiring with this organization. And that's really what you want to develop. You really, from the get-go, want to identify. And I'm sure there have been a lot of great startups that have great ideas but failed because they couldn't identify a core group of people that this was more important to them than anything else, besides God and their family. You just need to get a core group of people that say, hey, we can do something fun, we can do something really innovative, we can really disrupt industry, we can help the community, we can help ourselves, we can help our families if we execute. So once you get that mentality, that culture, that we're all in it together, and if we execute, we can take this to the next level. That's a very powerful aphrodisiac. I think once people get a taste of it. And the hardest part of getting people to do that is often they're coming from other situations where they've had these jobs where their bosses, all they wanted them to do is clock in and clock out. And so they've had 4 or 5 jobs like that. Now they come with an opportunity with you, and you're like, no, we're going to change the world. Same thing, I may have asked you at the beginning, are they at the right time in their lives where they want to do that? Or maybe they're just at a time in their lives where they just want to get a paycheck and clock in and clock out. So you also have to find people who are also in your mindset, who want to do something exciting, who want to do something different, who want to take it to the next level. And it's not all about finances. It's all about helping people, making a difference in the world, solving a problem, and financial freedom. That may come with it too. But the joy and excitement to do something really creative and novel, for a lot of people, it's a chance of a lifetime. And if you are in a position to give someone that opportunity to kind of really make a difference, because I always say, most of the time, we're all working 40, 50 hours a week. I mean, if we got to work 40, 50 hours a week, why not do it in something that can make a huge difference? So why spend 40, 50 hours a week just kind of being a cog in the wheel, when you have an opportunity to make a difference in the world, make a difference with people, with people's lives, their experiences, and then the people who are in the company, have them have unlimited potential professionally, financially. All of that is a win-win, and you just have to get together that team that feels like that. So I'll do another video about that last part on its own, and some of the other parts too on its own, but I wanted to kind of give you this big overview. I'm going to summarize all of that in a nutshell to say, look, this isn't for everybody. Not everybody wants to do this. It does have some cost. Of course, we've talked some of the benefits, but the cost is, it's going to be more than a job. You're going to be on it all times. You're going to be focused on it. You're going to need will, drive. You're going to need not to give up. You're going to have to jump through hurdles. But if you're willing to do that, and you're persistent, and you do your homework, and you do all the above, okay, it's you have to exceed every expectation and just do everything even one notch higher than you're thinking. And if you do that, I think your chances of being successful increase. So the way I would say is, you don't have to do everything that I just mentioned, and you don't have to do everything I mentioned really well. All I can say is, the more things you do, and the more things you do really well, the more likely you are to achieve this blowout business of your dreams. So it's not like I'm only going to do 8 out of the 10 or 6 out of the 10 or whatever. It's how many you do, how well you do it, will simply maximize your chance for success. The more you do it, the more steps you take, and the more time and energy you put into each one, the more likely you are to be successful. Listen, I really would love your comments, especially on all the different steps that I talked about. Please, by the way, subscribe if you can, so I'll be bringing you more content about how to grow your company. Tell your friends about this if you enjoyed this, or share this with your friends. And then please leave comments. Where am I going wrong? Where am I going right? Are there things that you've tried in your business that has mimicked what we've talked about? Are there other things you've done that I left out or didn't get a chance to get to? Please leave in the comments section below. I'll respond. Or if I can help you in any way too, if there were some of the things that I mentioned, some vendors or anybody else you want my opinion, you can also find me at BaktariMD.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, of course on this YouTube channel too. Leave a comment and I will get back to you. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. See you next time. Bye-bye.